They say when you fall in love, you never think about the day it could destroy you. You never look at the person smiling across the table and imagine that one day they could be the reason your name is written in the news, or the reason your family is left asking questions with no answers. For Alicia Morgan, love began with laughter, warmth, and promises of forever. But it ended with silence, suspicion, and the kind of betrayal that shakes your soul to the core. Alicia was a woman who always believed in second chances. She wasn't rich, she wasn't flashy, but she carried herself with a quiet strength that made people respect her. She grew up in a hard-working family, taught from an early age that loyalty was everything. And when she met Daniel, the man who would change her life forever, she thought she had found someone who shared those values. Daniel was charming, intelligent, and ambitious. He knew how to make a woman feel like she was the only one in the room. Friends warned Alicia that he seemed too smooth, too rehearsed. But Alicia ignored the whispers. She believed she had finally found her soulmate. In the beginning, Daniel treated her like royalty. Flowers at her job, surprises on weekends, long drives where he whispered dreams of building an empire together. He made her feel like she was part of something greater than herself. And when he asked her to marry him, Alicia didn't hesitate. She said yes. She thought it was the happiest day of her life. But happiness has a way of masking the truth. What Alicia didn't see, what she couldn't imagine, was that Daniel's perfect smile hid something darker. Something she would only discover when it was too late. After the wedding, things began to change. Slowly at first. So subtly Alicia almost convinced herself it was just stress or work. Daniel grew controlling. He wanted to know where she was at all times, who she spoke to, why she stayed late at work. His questions weren't curious. They were interrogations. And when she tried to laugh it off, he would stare at her with a coldness that sent a chill through her body. But Alicia stayed, because when you believe someone is your soulmate, you make excuses for their flaws. You tell yourself that love is patience, that love is sacrifice. What Alicia didn't know was that every sacrifice she made only gave Daniel more power over her. The first real crack came one Friday night, when Daniel didn't come home. No phone call, no message, nothing. Alicia stayed up all night, her mind racing between worry and anger. When he finally walked in at dawn, he smelled of alcohol and perfume. She asked him where he had been. His reply was a sharp slap across her face. Alicia froze. The man who once kissed her forehead every morning had just struck her, and worse, he looked at her as though it was her fault. "Don't question me again," he growled. Alicia should have walked away that day, but she didn't, because abuse doesn't always start with fists. It starts with manipulation, with fear, with the thought that maybe you did something wrong. So Alicia forgave him. She told herself it would never happen again. But of course it did. Months passed, and Daniel's behavior grew darker. He isolated her from her friends. He cut off her family. He made her believe that without him, she was nothing. And then, one night, Alicia didn't come home. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe she was staying with a friend. Maybe she needed space. But when her mother called her phone the next morning, and it went straight to voicemail, panic set in. Alicia was gone. Just like that. Vanished without a trace. Daniel told everyone she had left him that she was unhappy, that she ran away. He even put on the act of a grieving husband, standing in front of reporters with tears in his eyes. But Alicia's family didn't believe him. Not for 1 second. Because they knew Alicia. They knew she would never abandon her mother, her younger brother, or her best friend without a word. Something wasn't right. And soon, the cracks in Daniel's story began to show. Neighbors reported strange noises the night Alicia disappeared. A car engine revving. A scream quickly silenced. One neighbor swore they saw Daniel dragging a large object wrapped in a sheet into his SUV. But when questioned by police, Daniel was smooth. Too smooth. He had explanations for everything. No body. No evidence. Just a missing wife and a husband who claimed to be heartbroken. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The police grew colder. The trail grew weaker. And Alicia's family felt like they were screaming into the void. But then, just when hope was fading, a discovery changed everything. Alicia's best friend, Tasha, refused to give up. She went through old photos, old texts, anything that could provide a clue. That's when she found it. A hidden message Alicia had left behind. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't desperate. It was clever. In one of her last text messages to Tasha, Alicia had written about Daniel's new hobby, a locked storage unit he visited almost every night. She joked that maybe he was hiding a second wife in there. At the time, it seemed like nothing. But now it was everything. Tasha went to the police with this information. At first, they brushed her off. But after enough pressure from Alicia's family, investigators finally obtained a warrant. And what they found inside that storage unit would shock everyone. Inside were Alicia's belongings, her purse, her clothes, even her wedding ring, all hidden in boxes, as though Daniel had tried to erase her existence. But there was something else, something even more chilling. A journal, Alicia's journal, her handwriting, her words. In it, she documented everything. The abuse, the threats, the fear that Daniel would kill her. Her final entry read, "If anything happens to me, it was Daniel." The discovery hit like a thunderbolt. Alicia hadn't just disappeared. She had been silenced. And Daniel, the man she called her soulmate, had become her killer. But here's the twist. Daniel didn't know about the journal. He didn't know Alicia had left behind a voice that would speak from beyond the grave. And that voice was about to turn the tables. Because now, Daniel wasn't just a grieving husband. He was a prime suspect in a murder investigation. As police tightened the net around him, Daniel grew desperate. He knew the walls were closing in. He knew his perfect mask was slipping. And that's when he made his biggest mistake. He tried to silence Tasha. Late one night, as Tasha drove home, she noticed headlights in her rear-view mirror. A black SUV following too closely. She sped up. The SUV sped up. She turned. It turned. Her heart pounded as she realized this wasn't random. This was Daniel. But Tasha wasn't Alicia. She wasn't going to be silenced. She called the police as she drove, her voice shaking but steady. Within minutes, patrol cars intercepted the SUV. Daniel was pulled out, furious, sweating, denying everything. But in that moment, his power was gone. The underdog had risen. Alicia's voice, Tasha's determination, her family's persistence. They had turned the tide. But justice is never that simple. Daniel was arrested, charged, but without Alicia's body, the case remained fragile. Prosecutors feared he might walk free, and as the trial loomed, whispers spread. Whispers that Daniel had powerful connections, that he wasn't just a husband. He was tied to something bigger, something darker, which left one haunting question hanging in the air. If Daniel was willing to kill his own wife to protect his secrets, what else was he hiding? And just when Alicia's family thought they were about to find closure, a new twist emerged. Weeks before the trial, an anonymous letter was delivered to Alicia's mother's house. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, but the message was clear. Alicia isn't the only one. There are others. The anonymous letter changed everything. Up until that moment, Alicia's case was tragic, heartbreaking, but in some ways simple. A husband suspected of killing his wife. But the words scribbled on that crumpled piece of paper opened a door to something far more sinister. Alicia isn't the only one. There are others. Those words burned into her mother's mind, into Tasha's heart, into the hands of the detectives who held them. If true, this wasn't just about Alicia anymore. This was about something bigger, something darker, something that could expose Daniel as more than just an abusive husband. Maybe even as a predator who had left a trail of women behind him. The letter arrived just weeks before Daniel's trial. Prosecutors were already struggling. They had no body. They had circumstantial evidence. Yes, the storage unit, the belongings, the journal. But without Alicia herself, it was going to be a battle to convince 12 jurors to send a man to prison for life. That letter became their chance to dig deeper. And what they found, it shocked even the most hardened investigators. Daniel's past wasn't clean. It was littered with shadows. Ex-girlfriends who had gone silent after breakups. Women who had confided in friends that Daniel scared them. only to later vanish from their social circles. Even one missing person report from years earlier, a woman named Mariah Daniels, filed in another state, closed with no answers. Suddenly, Daniel didn't look like a grieving widower. He looked like a serial manipulator, maybe worse. But proving it would take more than suspicion. The trial began with chaos. The courthouse was packed. Reporters swarmed the steps. Alicia's family clutched photos of her, demanding justice. On the other side, Daniel's supporters, yes, unbelievably, he had them, claimed he was a victim of a witch hunt, a man being punished simply for being unfaithful, not for murder. Daniel walked into that courtroom in a tailored suit, head held high, smirk on his lips. He looked less like a man on trial, and more like a CEO giving a keynote speech. His confidence was chilling. It was as though he believed he was untouchable. The prosecution painted a picture of control and violence. They read Alicia's journal aloud. They showed her belongings from the storage unit. They called Tasha to the stand, her voice steady but emotional as she recounted the night Daniel followed her, tried to silence her, and nearly ran her off the road. Every word dripped with the truth of Alicia's terror. But Daniel's defense team was ruthless. They tore into Tasha, questioning her motives, suggesting she was jealous of Alicia, that she had fabricated stories to destroy Daniel's life. They claimed the journal was exaggerated, the writings of a woman who wanted attention, not evidence of a crime. And without Alicia's body, without physical proof of murder, doubt began to creep into the minds of the jury. That's when the prosecution revealed what they had been holding back, the anonymous letter. The courtroom went silent as the judge allowed it to be read. The words echoed through the chamber. Alicia isn't the only one. There are others. Gasps filled the air. Alicia's mother sobbed quietly. Daniel's face remained stone cold, but for the first time, his jaw tightened. He knew the walls were closing in. The prosecution brought in investigators who testified about Daniel's past, about the women who had vanished from his life. They introduced Mariah Daniels' family, who described the same chilling pattern of charm, control, and disappearance. Suddenly, Alicia's story wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was part of a pattern. A trail of broken women who had once believed Daniel's lies. The jury leaned forward. The public leaned in. But Daniel still fought back. He took the stand himself, something most defendants never do. He looked the jurors in the eye, his voice steady, his tone calm. He told them Alicia was troubled, that she left him because she couldn't handle his success, that Tasha was obsessed with him and had planted evidence to frame him, that the prosecution was weaving a fairy tale because they had no proof. For a moment, just a moment, his performance almost worked. The jurors shifted. Doubt lingered in the air. And then the twist came, because just when Daniel thought he could charm his way to freedom, the prosecution dropped a bombshell. Alicia's journal wasn't the only one. They had found another, hidden in the belongings of Mariah Daniels, uncovered by her family after years of silence. And in that journal, Mariah had written the same chilling line Alicia had. If anything happened to me, it was Daniel. The courtroom erupted. 2 women, 2 journals. The same message, the same fear. And suddenly, Daniel's carefully constructed mask cracked. He tried to remain calm, but his hands shook. His voice wavered. The jury saw it. The public saw it. His power was slipping away. For Alicia's family, it was a moment of hope. For Tasha, it was validation. For Daniel, it was the beginning of the end. But justice is never straightforward. As the trial stretched on, rumors swirled. That Daniel had ties to powerful men. That he had secrets people wanted buried. That if he went down, he might take others with him. And then came the real shocker. Midway through the trial, another letter arrived. This time delivered not to Alicia's family, but to the courthouse itself. It was typed anonymous, and it read, "If you think Daniel is a monster, you're only seeing half the story. Look closer. The people protecting him are worse. If you want the truth, follow the money." Suddenly, this wasn't just about Alicia, or Mariah, or even Daniel. This was about something bigger. Something that stretched beyond one man. Something that hinted at corruption, at power, at a web of secrets that Alicia had stumbled into Without realizing it, the prosecution hesitated. The judge demanded answers. The defense scoffed, calling it a stunt. But the seed had been planted. What if Daniel wasn't acting alone? What if his arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable, came from the fact that he was being protected by forces even darker than himself? Alicia's family wanted justice, but now they began to wonder, were they fighting one man or an entire system built to keep him safe? As the trial neared its end, the jury was torn. The evidence was powerful. Yes, the journals damning, the testimony emotional. But without a body, without undeniable proof, could they convict? The closing arguments came like thunder. The prosecution painted Daniel as a predator who believed women were disposable, who thought his charm could erase his crimes. The defense painted him as a victim of lies, a man destroyed by jealous women and an overzealous system. And then it was over. The jury deliberated. Hours passed, then a day, then another. Alicia's family sat in agony. Tasha prayed. Daniel smirked, convinced he had escaped again. And finally, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood. The words that followed would decide everything. We, the jury, find the defendant. But before the verdict could even be read, chaos erupted. A scream rang out from the back of the courtroom. A woman stood, shaking, clutching a folder in her hands. Her voice cracked as she cried out, "I was one of them too. He tried to kill me." Security rushed forward. The judge slammed the gavel. Reporters surged. And in that moment, Daniel's face went pale. Because the past he thought he had buried was now clawing its way to the surface. The trial wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The anonymous letters, the hidden victims, the whispers of powerful men protecting him. The truth was unraveling, piece by piece. And the real question now was no longer whether Daniel killed Alicia. It was, how many more victims are still out there? And how far would the people protecting Daniel go to keep the truth buried? They say evil has many faces. Some hide in shadows. Some wear masks. And some, like Daniel, walk proudly in daylight, smiling as though their hands aren't drenched in blood. The courtroom was supposed to be the place where Alicia's story finally found closure, where her voice, carried through journals, friends, and family, would finally break the chains of silence. But that scream, that woman rising from the back with trembling hands, changed everything. Her name was Clarissa, a woman no one had ever tied to Daniel before. She stood with a folder, so thick it looked like it carried the weight of years. Inside were photographs, police reports, and journals of her own. She claimed Daniel had groomed her, too, that he had tried to strangle her one night after she threatened to expose him. She barely escaped with her life. And the worst part? She said she reported it. She went to the police. She begged for help, but her case was buried. No follow-up, no justice, just silence. The courtroom froze as her words pierced the air. Some jurors gasped. The judge tried to regain order, but it was too late. The truth had spilled out, raw and undeniable. Clarissa's folder wasn't just evidence against Daniel. It was evidence against a system that had allowed him to thrive. Reports stamped with case closed. Officers who had ignored her pleas. Records of Daniel's donations to local officials. A paper trail that screamed corruption. And suddenly, the anonymous letter made sense. Follow the money. Daniel wasn't just a predator working in isolation. He was shielded, protected, empowered by people who valued his wealth, his charm, his connections more than the lives of the women he destroyed. The prosecution seized a moment. They petitioned the judge to admit Clarissa's testimony. The defense objected violently, calling it a stunt, a last-minute ambush meant to poison the jury. But the judge, sensing the gravity, allowed it. Clarissa took the stand, and as she spoke, Daniel's mask cracked further. He couldn't smirk anymore. He couldn't charm his way out. His eyes darted. His hands clenched. For Alicia's mother, it was almost unbearable. Each word Clarissa spoke was like hearing her daughter's voice echo from beyond the grave. The same tactics, the same manipulation, the same violence. Alicia's journal wasn't just her truth. It was part of a chorus of silenced women now rising to speak. The defense scrambled. They tried to discredit Clarissa, calling her unstable, calling her vindictive. But her evidence was solid. Police reports, medical records, friends who corroborated her story. Too much to dismiss, too much to bury. The trial became bigger than one man. It became a battle against the very system that allowed predators like Daniel to thrive. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding not just justice for Alicia, but for every woman who had been ignored, silenced, erased. No more Elysius, the signs read. No more silence. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom held its breath. Hours of testimony, weeks of pain, years of silence, all coming down to this. The foreman stood. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The room erupted. Alicia's mother wept into Tasha's arms. Reporters shouted. Protesters screamed with relief. For a moment, a single, fleeting moment, it felt like justice had been served. Daniel was led away in handcuffs. His face no longer smug but hollow, his empire of lies crumbling before the world's eyes. But justice has layers. And as the gavel came down, the whispers didn't stop. Clarissa's testimony had opened a door too wide to shut. The corruption, the buried reports, the men in power who had protected Daniel for years. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because while Daniel sat in a cell, others still walked free. Others who had looked the other way. Others who had cashed his donations. Others who had silenced women like Alicia and Clarissa to protect their own interests. And then, days after the verdict, another package arrived at Alicia's mother's home. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. She plugged it in with trembling hands. On the screen appeared videos, grainy dark, filmed in secret. Daniel, with other men, powerful men, laughing, drinking, and in the background, women, some conscious, some not. The message was clear. Daniel was only one piece of the puzzle. The people who had protected him weren't just corrupt. They were predators. 2. Tasha stared at the screen, her hands shaking. Alicia's mother collapsed into sobs. And Clarissa whispered the words no one wanted to say aloud. This goes deeper than we ever imagined. Because the real story wasn't just about a husband who killed his wife. It was about an entire web of darkness, where power, money, and evil worked hand in hand. And now that the truth was leaking, the question wasn't whether Daniel would pay for his crimes. The question was, how many more monsters were still out there? And how far would they go to keep their secrets buried? A soulmate turned killer. A family who refused to be silenced. Women who rose from the shadows to speak. And a truth so dark, it shook the very foundation of justice. This wasn't the end of Alicia's story. It was the beginning of a revolution. Do you think Daniel acted alone, or was he just a pawn in something much bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you believe. Family, this story isn't just about Alicia. It's about every woman whose voice was stolen, and every truth that's still hidden. Stay locked in, because part 2 will expose secrets that powerful people never wanted you to know. Until then, keep your eyes open, keep your heart strong, and remember, justice may be delayed, but it cannot be denied. If this story gave you chills, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because more chilling true crime stories are coming. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's next.